Get out of this house, you cursed child! Victoria's voice cracked through the silence like a whip as she shoved 6-year-old Lily Parker into the yard, her small hands clutching a threadbare teddy bear against her chest. Charles, Victoria's lover, sneered as he crushed the bear under his shoe, the muffled crunch echoing in the cold air. Without hesitation, Victoria grabbed a bucket of icy water and hurled it over Lily's trembling body, the shock forcing a sharp cry from her lips. "This is how we wash away the bad luck you brought into this family?" she spat, her eyes hard and merciless. Lily's little frame quivered, her wet hair plastered against her pale face, tears mixing with freezing water dripping from her chin. Her father had been buried only hours earlier, yet the woman who once pretended to comfort her now cast her aside like unwanted trash. "I'll be good, I promise," Lily pleaded, her small voice breaking, but Victoria only laughed coldly. "You are no daughter of mine. Your father is gone, your mother long dead. No one wants you here." Around them, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, then quickly closed their doors, unwilling to interfere. Lily's eyes searched desperately for compassion, but all she found was silence, the world turning its back on her grief. She sank to the ground, arms wrapped around the sodden teddy bear, whispering to the night, "Daddy, where am I supposed to go now?" The air felt heavy, her tiny sobs lost in the emptiness, and then just beyond the gate, the roar of an engine shattered the stillness. A black Cadillac screeched to a halt, its headlights spilling across the yard. A man stepped out, his eyes narrowing at the sight before him. "Tell me, if you witnessed a child cast out so mercilessly, would you turn away? Or would you step forward?" The black Cadillac idled at the gate, its headlights carving through the shadows as the man stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark overcoat that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken battles. His name was Alexander Grant, a self-made millionaire whose face had once graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, celebrated for his ruthless brilliance in business and his uncanny ability to turn failing real estate ventures into empires. But behind the sharp lines of his jaw and the steel in his eyes lay memories he had buried deep. Memories of nights he had shivered in fear, abandoned by those who should have protected him. That past surged violently to the surface as he saw the sight before him. A child, barely 6, drenched in cold water, clutching a broken teddy bear, her eyes wide with terror. For a moment he could not breathe. It was as though he was staring at himself decades earlier, the boy no one fought for. His fists clenched until his knuckles turned white, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady, each word carrying the weight of restrained fury. "What is going on here?" His questions sliced through the silence. Victoria stiffened, her false tears suddenly drying on her cheeks. She stumbled for words, her voice trembling with counterfeit sweetness. "Alexander, you misunderstand. I was only teaching the girl discipline. She refuses to listen." Charles stepped forward, his eyes mocking, a cigarette dangling carelessly between his fingers. "This is family business," he sneered, exhaling smoke into the night air. "You showed up late to your brother's funeral, and now you think you can play hero? Stay out of it." Alexander's gaze snapped to him, icy and unflinching. The anger that rose inside him was not just for Lily, it was for Richard, the man lying beneath the earth who had once pulled Alexander out of his own broken past. Richard had given him shelter, had believed in him when no one else did, and Alexander had vowed that one day he would repay that debt. That day had arrived. He stepped forward, shrugging off his overcoat and draping it over Lily's trembling shoulders. She flinched at first, but then, sensing warmth and safety she had almost forgotten existed, her tiny hands clutched the fabric as if she feared it might disappear. Her tear-streaked face tilted up toward him, fragile hope flickering in her eyes. Alexander crouched to her level, his hand resting firmly but gently on her small shoulder. "You're safe now," he whispered, his words low but unshakable. He rose to his full height and turned back toward Victoria and Charles, his tone ringing with finality. "She's coming with me." The declaration left no room for argument. Victoria's eyes narrowed, venom glinting beneath her painted lashes. "You think you can just take her?" she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. Charles chuckled, waving his cigarette like a careless flag. Let him. That little brat will crawl back soon enough. She's a burden no one can carry for long. But Alexander did not waver. Without another word, he bent down, lifted Lily into his arms, and carried her past the gate. She clung to him as though her very life depended on it, the wet teddy bear pressed against her chest, her sobs softening into shivers. The Cadillac door opened, the interior glowing with muted light, and as Alexander slid inside with her, the heavy door shut like the sealing of a vow. The car pulled away from the house that had just become a prison, and for the first time that night, Lily's small body sagged against him, exhausted. She whispered through trembling lips, "Sir, are you going to leave me too?" The question pierced his chest like a blade. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, the memory of his own unanswered pleas clawing at him, and though his voice caught in his throat, he forced himself to answer in silence by tightening his arm around her fragile frame. This child would not be left behind. Not again. Not while he was alive. The Cadillac glided through the city streets, neon lights flickering past the windows as Lily sat pressed against the leather seat, her small hands clutching the soaked teddy bear to her chest. She barely breathed, afraid that at any moment the man beside her might change his mind and cast her back into the night. Alexander drove in silence, his jaw tight, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Inside his chest, a storm raged, old wounds reopening as he glanced at the trembling child beside him. He had built empires, crushed rivals, negotiated contracts worth millions. Yet he felt utterly unprepared for the fragile life now resting in his car. When the vehicle finally rolled into the underground garage of his penthouse, he opened the door for her and extended his hand. Lily hesitated, her eyes darting as though searching for a trap, then placed her tiny palm into his. The warmth of his grip startled her. It had been so long since she had felt a hand that wasn't pushing her away. They walked through the lobby, where the doorman greeted Alexander with a nod. His eyes flicked to Lily's drenched clothes, but he said nothing when he saw the shadow in Alexander's gaze. The elevator ride was quiet, Lily staring down at her shoes, her reflection warped in the polished metal doors. When they stepped into the penthouse, the vast space seemed overwhelming to her. High ceilings, clean lines, shelves filled with books, and a city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a world so far from the cold corner she had known. Alexander knelt down, handed her a towel, and pointed to the bathroom. "Change into these," he said softly, placing a sweater and sweatpants in her arms. Minutes later she emerged, the oversized sweater swallowing her frame, her hair damp but no longer dripping. She looked smaller than ever, like a bird fallen from its nest. Alexander had warmed a pot of soup, the gentle aroma filling the air. He set a bowl before her, steam curling upward like a tender invitation. Lily's fingers hovered over the spoon, but she shook her head. I'll only eat a little," she whispered. "I don't want to get yelled at." The words cut through him sharper than any boardroom betrayal. He pulled out a chair across from her and leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Here, no one will yell at you. You eat when you're hungry. You rest when you're tired. You don't need permission just to exist." She blinked at him, her eyes searching for the hidden condition, the trapdoor that always followed promises in her world. But when none came, she slowly lifted the spoon, blew gently on the hot broth, and took a small sip. For the first time in years, warmth spread through her chest. Not just from the food, but from the silence that held no cruelty. Alexander watched without rushing her, his presence steady, his eyes softened by something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. When she set the spoon down halfway through the bowl, she asked quietly, almost fearfully, You don't hate me?" He paused, then answered firmly, "No one has the right to hate a child for simply being alive." Her lip quivered, her gaze falling to the table. "They said I was bad luck." Alexander reached across, draping a blanket over her legs. "You are not bad luck. You are Thomas's daughter, and you are yourself. Their words cannot define you." She clutched the teddy bear tighter, the faintest flicker of belief crossing her face. Later, as night settled over the city, Alexander showed her to the guest room. setting a small moon-shaped lamp beside the bed. She slid under the covers, eyes wide open in the unfamiliar safety, whispering into the quiet, "Mom, Dad, why did you leave me with them?" Outside her door, Alexander sat against the wall, his eyes closed, his chest heavy with the echo of his own boyhood cries. But this time he was the one listening, the one who would not walk away. For Lily, a fragile beginning had just taken root. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, spilling across the penthouse floor as Lily padded softly into the living room, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. She had folded the blanket on her bed the way her stepmother used to demand, though no one here had told her she must. Alexander was at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a mug, his movements deliberate and calm. He glanced at her and offered a faint smile, the kind that didn't need words. She sat on the rug with her teddy bear, absent-mindedly running her fingers along its worn seams. That bear had been her mother's last gift, and though it was ragged, it was the only constant that had survived the storms of her young life. As her finger pressed against a loose thread near its ear, the fabric gave way, revealing a sliver of something hard inside. She froze. Gently, carefully, she tugged at the seam until a tiny silver USB drive slipped into her palm. Her breath caught, her eyes widening, as if she had just uncovered a secret too heavy for her small hands. "Uncle Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The bear is torn, and there's this." She extended the USB toward him, her hands shaking. Alexander crossed the room quickly, his expression sharp with concern. He knelt beside her, took the drive, and turned it over in his fingers. His instincts as a businessman had trained him to recognize when something seemingly insignificant carried enormous weight. He met Lily's frightened eyes. "Do you want to see together what's inside?" She nodded, hugging the bear tightly to her chest. At the dining table, he slid the drive into his laptop. The screen blinked, showing only one file, an audio recording marked with a date from a year ago. He clicked play. The sound of Richard Parker's voice filled the room, weary but distinct. "What is this bottle of medicine? I don't need this. When I take it, my heart races." "Victoria, where did you get this?" A pause followed, then Charles's voice, cold and flat. "The doctor prescribed it. Don't be paranoid. Drink it." Another stretch of silence, and then Victoria's whispers slithered through the speakers, soft but dripping with malice. "Let him drink more. Let him die already." Lily gasped, her small hands flying to her mouth as tears welled up instantly. The teddy bear tumbled from her arms as she cried out, They poisoned my dad!" Her sobs shook her entire frame, her voice cracking under the unbearable weight of realization. Alexander placed his hand over hers, steady and firm, anchoring her storm. His own chest burned with rage, but his voice was controlled, deliberate. "Listen to me, Lily. Your father didn't want you to live in fear. He left you the truth. He trusted that someone would find it and protect you." She buried her face against his arm, her tears soaking into his sleeve. He knew they were hurting him?" Alexander's throat tightened. Maybe he did. Maybe he couldn't stop them, but he believed someone would finish what he started. And now that someone is me. He rewound the recording, listening again, catching the clink of glass, the scrape of a chair, every tiny sound that would matter in court. His mind shifted into precision mode. He took screenshots, saved backups to his hard drive in the cloud, then slid the USB into a shockproof pouch. Not a second was wasted. Lily sniffled, her voice small, frightened. "If they find out, won't they take it away? Won't they hurt us?" Alexander looked at her, his gaze unyielding. "No one will take this from us. Not them. Not anyone." He pulled out his phone and dialed Jonathan Reed, a law professor and attorney he had trusted for years. When Reed answered, Alexander's voice was low but urgent. "I have audio evidence, poisoning, family conspiracy, corporate fraud. I need you today." On the other end, Reed's calm reply came swiftly. "Keep everything secure. Do not send files electronically. I'll come to you. Protect the child first." Alexander hung up, then bent to Lily's level. "We'll have breakfast, then a trusted friend will come. He's not one for big words, but he fights for the truth." Lily nodded weakly, still gripping her teddy bear though its ear hung open. She whispered into its worn fur, "Daddy, I found what you left me. I'll hold it tight." Alexander stood tall, determination surging through him like a rising tide. At first he had thought he was only repaying Thomas, a debt of friendship. But now, with Victoria's whisper echoing in his ears, he knew this was bigger. It was no longer about gratitude. It was about justice, about shielding a child who was a mirror of his younger self, about making sure evil did not win. As he locked the USB into his safe, the faint clatter of Lily's spoon against her cereal bowl sounded in the background, fragile yet steady. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the stirrings of purpose beyond business. He looked at her small frame, her messy hair, her tear-stained cheeks, and silently vowed she would never be alone again. By the afternoon, the storm had begun, not of thunder or rain, but of headlines and flashing cameras. Alexander's phone buzzed relentlessly, each alert carrying a new headline that twisted the truth into a weapon. Millionaire Alexander Grant accused of kidnapping niece to seize family assets. Child snatched from grieving stepmother. Billionaire's greed tears family apart. Every headline painted him as a villain. Every photograph carefully staged with Victoria's face streaked with crocodile tears, clutching a portrait of her late husband as if she had been the epitome of loyalty. Alexander shut off the screen, jaw clenched, but the sting of their smear campaign was undeniable. Across the city, reporters swarmed outside the old Parker estate, capturing Victoria's dramatic sobs as Charles stood beside her with a rehearsed look of sorrow, his hand placed protectively on her shoulder. "She's just a little girl," Victoria wailed into the microphones. "He took her from me. She's all I have left of Richard. He's exploiting her to get at the company shares." The words were poison dressed as grief, and the cameras ate them up. In the penthouse, Lily watched the news unfold on the living room television. Her eyes wide, her teddy bear hugged tight against her chest. The lies landed on her like stones, crushing what little certainty she had gained. "They hate me," she whispered, her lip trembling. "They'll never stop." Alexander immediately switched off the screen and knelt before her, his eyes steady. "Listen to me, Lily. Lies can be loud, but truth has its own strength. We will not let them define who you are." She blinked at him, searching his face for cracks, for hesitation, but found only resolve. Still, the child's shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of public scorn. Alexander knew then that the battle would not only be fought in courtrooms, but also in hearts and minds. He wasted no time. He called Grace Miller, a young librarian with access to public corporate records, and asked her to cross-check the stock transfers. He contacted Margaret Brown, the elderly neighbor who had witnessed the cruelty in the yard, and Henry Adams, the homeless man who had also seen the abuse. Both were hesitant, their voices wavering with fear of retaliation. But Alexander pressed gently, promising them protection, promising they would not stand alone. "If you stay silent," he told Margaret quietly, "they win, and Lily will never be free." Slowly, with trembling courage, she agreed. Henry, beaten down by life but unwilling to let another child suffer as he had, gave a firm nod. "I'll tell the truth. They can't scare me into silence." Meanwhile, Jonathan Reed, the seasoned attorney, sent Alexander a message. "Prepare duplicates of all evidence. We will file for emergency guardianship and request witness protection." The legal machine was beginning to turn, but Alexander knew Victoria and Charles would strike harder. That evening, as he tucked Lily into bed, her small voice pierced the darkness. "Uncle Alexander, if they hurt the neighbors, if they hurt Henry, it'll be my fault. Because of me." His chest tightened, the words slicing deeper than any accusation from the press. He sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, Lily. The guilty ones are them. You carry no blame. You are not their sin." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she nodded faintly, clinging to his words as if they were her only anchor. In the silence that followed, Alexander thought back to his own childhood, to the way his stepfather's fists had filled him with shame that wasn't his to carry. He would not let Lily inherit that same burden. He rose, his silhouette steady in the doorway. "Sleep, little one. Tomorrow we fight with truth." As he closed her door, his phone vibrated again. This time it was not news, but a photo sent anonymously. A dark car parked beneath his building, headlights flashing twice before going dark. A message followed. You can't protect her forever. Alexander's lips pressed into a hard line. He forwarded the photo to Reed in building security, then poured himself a glass of water, steadying his resolve. The battle had escalated from whispers and tears to open warfare. Lies might dominate the headlines, but he had something stronger. Truth carved into evidence, witnesses ready to speak, and a child whose courage was beginning to glow through her fear. As he stood at the window overlooking the city, the words formed silently on his lips, a vow more binding than any contract he had ever signed. I will not let them destroy her, not while I breathe. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras clicking like the beat of war drums as Alexander Grant led Lily Parker inside. His tall frame was calm and unshaken, but his hand never once let go of hers, as though the world might try to snatch her away if he loosened his grip. Inside, the air of the courtroom was heavy with expectation. Judge Patricia Coleman sat sternly at the bench, her gavel resting like a loaded weapon. To the left sat Victoria Hayes in a black dress, her eyes red but carefully painted to appear sorrowful, while Charles Hayes leaned beside her in a crisp, dark shirt, feigning the role of a grieving uncle. Their attorney, Avery Clark, a man with polished shoes and slick words, stood ready to spin lies into silk. Across from them, Alexander stood with Professor Jonathan Reed, calm and methodical, his thick case file prepared like armor. Lily sat quietly beside Alexander, clutching her teddy bear, her small frame dwarfed by the scale of the chamber. The clerk's voice echoed, calling the case to order, and the judge's gavel struck once. Attorney Clark rose first, his tone righteous. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Hayes, is a heartbroken widow who has just lost her husband. Now, in her most vulnerable moment, her late husband's brother has abducted her daughter to seize assets and company shares. This is an outrageous abuse of power. Victoria sobbed on cue, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her gaze flicking toward the cameras that lined the back of the room. Alexander's face remained carved in stone, but inside he felt the burn of fury at her performance. When his turn came, his voice was steady, each word deliberate. Your Honor, this is not an abduction. This child was dragged into a yard, doused with cold water, and called cursed by the very woman who claims to love her. I have witnesses. I have evidence. I am here to protect her, not to profit from her pain. The judge's eyes narrowed. Bring in the witnesses. Margaret Brown, the elderly neighbor, stepped forward first, her hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses. I live downstairs, she said softly. I saw them. Mr. Hayes grabbed the girl by the wrist. Mrs. Hayes poured a bucket of water straight over her head. The child cried and begged, but they only laughed. Attorney Clark pounced. Do you hold any personal grudge against my client? Margaret shook her head firmly. No, sir. I was afraid to speak, but what I saw was the truth. Then came Henry Adams, the homeless man, his cap pulled low but his voice firm. I sleep out back near the alley. I heard her crying. I saw them drag her like a sack. I wanted to help, but Robert Hayes glared at me like he'd kill me if I moved. I've got nothing to lose, but that girl doesn't deserve to live the way I did. That's why I'm here. The courtroom murmured, the atmosphere shifting. Professor Reed stepped forward, placing a USB on the table. Your Honor, this device was found hidden inside the child's teddy bear. It contains a recording verified by digital forensics. With the court's permission, I'd like to play it. The judge gave a nod, and silence fell as Richard Parker's weary voice filled the chamber. What is this medicine? When I drink it, my heart races. Victoria, where did it come from? Then Charles's cold reply, Doctor prescribed it. Drink. And finally Victoria's venomous whisper, let him drink more. Let him die already. Gasps erupted, the gallery buzzing with shock. Charles shot to his feet, shouting, Lies! Fabrication! Anyone could splice this. Reed remained unshaken. Your Honor, here is the verification report confirming the time, the metadata, and the authenticity of the recording. It has not been altered. The judge reviewed the document, her brow furrowing. Reed continued, laying out another report. And here is a technical analysis of the car accident that killed Mr. Parker's wife. The central control system was tampered with. altered by someone with direct access. The logs show interference on days when Robert Hayes borrowed the vehicle. Victoria's hands gripped her chair, her knuckles white. Charles's face drained of color, his bravado cracking under the weight of mounting evidence. Then unexpectedly, Lily rose from her seat, her voice small but piercing the silence. If they cared about me, they wouldn't have poured water on me. They wouldn't laugh when I cried. The entire courtroom went still. Her words, unpolished but pure, carried more weight than all the legal arguments combined. Judge Coleman leaned forward, her eyes softening as she turned back to the clerk. Record the child's words verbatim. With a firm strike of the gavel, her voice rang out. This court acknowledges evidence of abuse and poisoning. The child shall be placed under the emergency guardianship of Mr. Alexander Grant. Furthermore, Victoria Hayes and Charles Hayes are hereby detained for further investigation into charges of attempted poisoning, child abuse, and forgery. Gasps rippled again, reporters scribbling furiously, camera flashes popping like fireworks. Victoria collapsed into her chair, her tears real now, while Charles cursed under his breath as officers cuffed his wrists. Lily rushed into Alexander's arms, her small body trembling as she clung to him. "Do I have anyone left?" she whispered. He held her tight against his chest, his voice low but steady. "Yes, you still have me, and you have yourself." The judge's gavel struck once more, the sound final, the noise of the room surging back like a storm. But in the circle of that embrace, there was only silence. Warm, protective silence, defying every lie that had been spoken. The day after the courtroom's gavel fell, the old Parker house no longer echoed with cruelty. Its doors opened softly under new locks, and this time Lily Parker walked inside, not as an unwanted child, but as someone finally home. Alexander Grant had promised the judge, and more importantly himself, that this place would not remain a prison of memory, but would become a beginning. With the help of friends and neighbors, the transformation began. Margaret Brown sewed warm curtains, Henry Adams built shelves with his calloused hands, and Grace Miller brought boxes of children's books to fill the rooms with color. Even Mary Thompson from the cafe arrived with trays of hot soup and cocoa, insisting that no child could heal on an empty stomach. Within weeks, the house had a new name painted on a wooden sign above the porch: Harbor of Light Center. It became a sanctuary for children in need, a place where laughter replaced tears and fear was no longer welcome. On Christmas Eve, the rooms glowed with lights strung across the walls. Lily, now wrapped in a soft purple scarf, ran to Alexander and pressed a letter against his chest. Her father's last words, entrusted to her through the teddy bear. "He told me to trust you," she whispered. Alexander's eyes stung as he bent down, replying softly, "And I promised him I would never fail you." That night, as snow drifted across the windows, Lily raised her voice in front of the gathered children and called Alexander a single word she had held back for months: "Dad." His breath caught, but his arms wrapped around her tightly, his heart finally at peace. The house filled with carols, laughter, and warmth, the sound of healing echoing into the night. The story had begun with cruelty, but ended with hope. Evil had been punished, innocence restored, and love had built something far stronger than fear. And now I turn to you. If a child like Lily stood before you, cold, frightened, and alone, what would you do? Would you turn away, or would you step forward as Alexander did? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes even one word of kindness can be the light that guides someone out of the dark.